Hello and welcome to the webinar on grant writing budget preparation. This is one of a suite of grant writing tutorials to help our community groups and organisations to improve their grant writing skills. My name is Alison Osborne. I'm the Grants Coordinator here at Northern Beaches Council. Budget tables are a key component to any grant application. They can and do make or break an application. It is also one of the major weaknesses we see in the grant applications that are submitted to Council's community grants programs. From my perspective, this is primarily down to people not having a clear understanding of the terminology or what is being asked of them as the applicant. There are two main components to a grant budget table: income and expenditure, and a lesser but still important component, the in-kind contribution. So to clarify, we have income, which is any and all sources of funding towards the project for which you are writing a grant application. Expenditure, which is anything you need to pay actual money for in order to carry out the project for which you are seeking a grant. And in-kind contribution, goods or services which are donated to the project but will not be paid for as a direct result of carrying out the project. You may have noticed that this is all related to the project for which you are seeking funding. It is not your organisational income and expenditure or any other component beyond the project. It is solely related to the project you are describing in your grant application. Depending on your project, your organisation, and plenty of other factors, you may have numerous sources of income, or you may be seeking full funding from the grant for your project. In some instances, that is perfectly okay to do if it's allowed under the guidelines. But your project will usually score better if you are making a financial contribution. So you can see here that we have included the grant amount you are requesting as income. You should always include this amount in your income table. Some grant applications ask you to identify whether or not your identified income is confirmed or unconfirmed. The grant request is an example of unconfirmed funding. I'll cover that off in a minute. Other items in here are the cash contribution from your organisation, if you are contributing, and there's another cash contribution from another organisation, perhaps a project partner. I've added in another grant that you may or may not have already secured to be planning to apply for in the near future. Include these in the application too, but make sure you're not asking this grant to fund the same thing as the other grant. That's a big no-no in grant land. You also need to include any other income streams for the project, like ticket or entry fees, or sales of merchandise, etc. Any other sources of income besides the grant that you are requesting will be viewed favourably by the assessment panel, as long as your income and expenditure balance, or in other words, one justifies the other. I've seen applications that show no grant income, but the project is fully funded by other income, which begs the question, why do you even need the grant? Or a grant request that is higher than the expenditure shown. What are you planning to do with the rest of the money? And on to expenditure we go. You should detail in your budget table all the activities or elements or components that make up your project. I've got some examples here in this table, but this is not an exhausting list by any means. Anything that you are going to spend money on should be included in the expenditure table. It's best if it's broken down rather than a single line item, although I admit this isn't always possible. You should try where possible to make the budget table in the application form align with the quotes or supporting documentation. What I mean by that is, if you have quotes that cover the entire project, you can include it as a single line item in the budget. If you have multiple components that are with different suppliers and contractors would be undertaking, then enter them separately, i.e. a quote for tennis court resurfacing and another one for new fencing would all be under a project to upgrade the tennis courts, but are very different elements and should be shown as such. Or if you are planning to purchase items from one supplier and engage a contractor to install them, separate them in the budget. Basically, break down the project costs to show that you have done your homework and know exactly what the project will cost. In-kind contribution. For small organisations and community groups in particular, this may be their only contribution to the project that they're seeking a grant for. That's okay, but we need to understand what that is, because again, I've seen some strange things get entered in as in-kind contribution. I've also seen in-kind contribution be included in the expenditure table, which will throw out your budget balance and create budget mayhem. In-kind contribution is really only two things: volunteer labour and donated materials, or, if you prefer, donated goods and services. Now, I alluded to confirmed and unconfirmed funding in an earlier slide. Not all applications ask you to define this element, but when they do, it's essential that you get this information correct, as well as the rest of your budget details, of course. Confirmed income is money that you have already secured for this project. It may be your organisation's contribution to the project or another grant that you have been successful with. It must relate to the same project. Unconfirmed funding is the money that you are planning or hoping to secure for the project, but is essential to the project proceeding. This may be a grant that you have applied for but not yet had the result for, or it could be a grant that you're planning to apply for in the near future. It may be income you earn from the project itself to help you recoup costs. But something to be mindful of here on income generating projects such as an event, you need to be sure whether making a profit is actually allowable under the grant guidelines. Some grants allow this, but many don't. GST can be tricky. Some grant applications want you to enter figures without GST included, some want it included. The guidelines and application form should state whether they want the figures inclusive or exclusive of GST. When you're successful with your grant application, some of the grants include GST and some of them don't, regardless of your GST status of your organisation. GST status is another item that people get stuck with. Some organisations or applicants don't know their GST status, and this can impact your ability to be paid GST as part of a grant. You can generally find the GST status of your organisation if you look up your ABN. If you don't have an ABN, you aren't registered for GST. Budget tables do come in all shapes and sizes, and formats can vary drastically. But key points to remember are that your budget table should only be about the project that you are seeking funding for. They should always balance. You should always include the grant you are requesting. You should define what you want to spend the grant funding on, and you should indicate what is confirmed income or unconfirmed. I have two examples to show you now. This first one is an example of an application council has submitted for funding to upgrade one of our playgrounds. In the top table, you can see that we have two income sources, the grant for $35,000 that we are requesting and the cash contribution from council of $50,000. One is confirmed and the other not. Then in the expenditure table below, you can see that we've separated the different elements of the playground into the play equipment and the installation costs. This is further broken down to show that we intend to fund what we intend to fund from our own sources and what we want the grant to pay for. What this shows the people assessing this application, hopefully, is that if they grant us full funding as requested, they will get a new playground that has two different types of play equipment, as well as the connecting pathways and seating, etc. It also demonstrates that partial funding would provide either the additional play equipment or less play equipment, but get the pathways and or seating as listed. It gives them options for what they can fund because it is so clearly defined. You will also note that the total income and expenditure both total $85,000, so it balances. And that if you were to add the figures in the expenditure table that I have attributed to Council, the 34K and the 15K, that correlates with the figures in the income table above that shows Council's contribution to the project is $50,000. This second example is an application we received from the community organisation in last year's environmental grant stream, and is obviously for solar panels to be installed on a community building that they lease. I wanted to include this example to show how they demonstrated their funding plan to install solar panels and then batteries over a couple of years as they secured funds. They have their own contribution of 15K and are seeking a further 10K from the grant, which was the maximum grant last year. And with that funding, they would install a few solar panels to get them underway on their solar journey. Then they've added in their fundraising plan. 3 years of fundraising to go towards future panels and batteries with the intention to apply again to this year's program, so they can add the last panels required to generate their ideal power levels and get a couple of batteries. They were successful in getting a grant, but unfortunately for them, the grant this year has a maximum of only 5K, so their plan has already gone astray, but they have a strategy and they've shown their intent through the budget, which was supported by other documentation including solar and energy reports that showed their usage and was what their optimum solar installation would be. The supporting information that you provide in an application will verify and justify what you are looking to do. Now, I mentioned in the playground example above the potential for partial funding. Partial funding is really common with grants, and that could be for a number of reasons. The two main would be that the funding body wants to spread the money around to as many organisations as possible, or it could be that your application hasn't justified full funding and they only want to fund part of the project or a specific element of it. As I mentioned earlier, breaking down your project elements in the budget will support your request for full funding or assist with identifying a partial amount and demonstrate a detailed and accurate budget, which is usually a key assessment criteria. Now, I also mentioned above supporting documentation in relation to the solar panel project. They supplied technical reports prepared by consultants, an excellent example of supporting material. But since this session is about budgets, I should stick to the script and talk about quotes. In supplying quotes, you are demonstrating that you have provided accurate costs and that you've done your research and planned how you will implement your project. Some programs make quotes mandatory above a certain dollar amount, and sometimes they insist on multiple quotes to further verify the costs. If they ask you to provide a quote, you should do it, even if it's not mandatory. It can only help your application. But the quote must reflect the works or goods that you have described in your application. For example, I'll use the solar panels again. Don't supply a quote that references a different type of panel, such as the 10 kilowatt solar system, when you are only installing the 6.6 kilowatt system. Supplying misleading information like that will make you appear either sloppy in not noticing the difference or sneaky and underhanded. So please be diligent and be accurate when preparing your budgets and the supporting documentation. When you are successful in securing a grant, you will need to prepare a final report and financial acquittal at the end of the process. This will generally require you to provide invoices and receipts to demonstrate where and how you spent the money and that you've done what you said you were going to do. I raise this just so that you are ready and have this information saved and to hand at the end of your project. And now we've come to the end of the presentation. I hope you found it useful and you're now ready to jump right into your next grant application full of enthusiasm. Thanks for watching and good luck with your next application. Bye.